The millionaire chose his mistress over his pregnant wife. The baby took his name and empire. This is the story of a powerful man named Arthur Harrington, the heir to a mighty family empire, who traded the love of his devoted, pregnant wife for the fleeting passion of a cunning mistress. He risked everything: his honor, his marriage, and the future of his unborn child. Betrayals, long-buried family secrets, and heartbreaking twists line the path of this unforgettable drama. The stakes climb higher at every turn, culminating in a final blow of karma that no one sees coming. Prepare to witness how a single choice can shape destinies and tear an entire legacy apart from within. Arthur Harrington was born into privilege. His father, Reginald Harrington, had established the Harrington Group in the early 1970s, creating a business empire spanning real estate, shipping, and luxury hotels. Based in New York City, the family name stood for wealth, power, and exclusivity. As an only son, Arthur was raised to believe he would one day sit at the helm of this towering empire. The Harrington Group's sprawling offices near Fifth Avenue had become a symbol of their unstoppable influence, perched near the epicenter of global commerce. Despite this aristocratic upbringing, Arthur didn't grow up with the aloofness one might expect. He spent summers interning in various departments of the company, from the dusty archives to the bustling marketing branch. Reginald insisted his son learn every aspect of the business, earning respect from employees of all ranks, especially those who'd watched him haul boxes at the loading dock or file documents on weekends. Arthur's mother, Elizabeth Harrington, was also deeply involved in philanthropic endeavors, co-chairing a charity that supported schools for underprivileged children in the city. She taught her son that wealth must be used responsibly, that empathy was the core of true leadership. By the time Arthur was 25, he had refined his polite demeanor, discovered a keen sense for negotiations, and developed a sharp mind. He was known to close deals with surprising agility, rarely raising his voice, always standing firm with a handshake and a warm smile. Senior executives found him approachable, yet resolute. He soon became the face of the Harrington Group at trade events, where his well-tailored suits, slicked-back dark hair, and confident posture made him an icon in high society circles. But there was another reason Arthur was admired: his relationship with Vanessa Blackwood. The daughter of Christopher Blackwood, a respected art dealer in Chelsea, Vanessa was considered the perfect partner to stand beside Arthur. Clever, elegant, and warm-hearted, she was the center of attention at elite galas. Their love blossomed over shared philanthropic passions. They often partnered on events that blended the arts with children's education, a key cause of the Harrington family. When Arthur proposed to Vanessa, the city's tabloids and society pages lit up with talk of the next powerful dynasty, soon to be bound by marriage. The wedding was held at the Harrington family's country estate in the Hamptons, an opulent ceremony that buzzed with exclusive guest lists, including politicians, media moguls, and a cameo by the renowned philanthropic couple Bill and Melinda Gates. As newlyweds, Arthur and Vanessa appeared unstoppable, their synergy fueling the Harrington Group's continuing ascent. They were unstoppable indeed, until the day an unfamiliar face arrived at the company's headquarters, carrying secrets that would unravel everything. Shortly after Arthur and Vanessa's wedding, the Harrington Group decided to expand into Europe's vibrant markets. Globalization was the future, and Arthur wanted to plant the Harrington flag in London. Through his father's connections, he hired a well-recommended liaison from the United Kingdom, Lillian Moore. Tall, raven-haired, and with a seductive English accent, Lillian had a swift, precise intellect and an unmatched ability to navigate international negotiations. She also had a mesmerizing aura about her, one that sparked gossip, the instant she walked into a room. She was recommended by a reputable recruitment agency called Westbridge and Associates, known to place candidates into high-stakes corporate positions worldwide. Her initial tasks were straightforward: assist in the Harrington Group's expansion, research the London property market, and help orchestrate events to attract European investors. Arthur found her knowledge indispensable. She seemed to have connections in every corner of the British capital, from top legal firms in Mayfair to real estate moguls in Kensington. Lillian introduced Arthur to Lord Spencer Montfort, a member of London's old aristocracy who owned prime land near the Thames. Securing Montfort's trust was crucial for the Harrington Group's plan to build an extravagant waterfront development. With Arthur's hands full juggling domestic expansions and philanthropic responsibilities alongside Vanessa, Lillian swiftly became his go-to advisor for European matters. Over frequent video calls and cross-Atlantic flights, they developed a rapport. Their interactions gradually grew more personal. Maybe it was the late-night dinner meetings after grueling negotiations, or the way Lillian casually brushed her hand against his sleeve as she leaned in to discuss important documents. Perhaps Arthur found it thrilling that, unlike Vanessa, Lillian never hesitated to criticize or challenge him. She was blunt, fierce, and unapologetic, qualities that simultaneously intrigued and unsettled him. Meanwhile, Vanessa was occupied with her own concerns. She was newly pregnant, a development both she and Arthur had prayed for. She felt a sense of elation, but also the usual apprehension any first-time mother experiences. She knew her husband's schedule was hectic, and she offered to assist by going over charitable project budgets while resting at home. As Arthur continued to jet between New York and London, Vanessa found solace in the supportive presence of Elizabeth, her mother-in-law, who also looked forward to becoming a grandmother. Over the next few weeks, however, Arthur's communications with Vanessa became oddly intermittent. Instead of Skype calls brimming with excitement about new deals, she received rushed text messages. When he did call, he sounded distant, as if trying to keep their conversations short. Vanessa assumed it was the stress of international expansion, never suspecting that during those quiet nights in London, a different kind of excitement burned in Arthur's luxurious penthouse suite overlooking Hyde Park. Little did she know that the seeds of betrayal were already planted. Arthur was dancing on the edge of temptation, inching ever closer to the woman who would ultimately turn his world and his marriage upside down. Arthur flew back to New York for a weekend in November. Vanessa was well into her second trimester, her pregnancy glow accentuating her beautiful features. However, the tension was palpable from the moment he stepped foot into their spacious Upper East Side apartment. Vanessa greeted him with a warm smile, but she could see the fatigue etched on his face, the way he scanned the room as if looking for a reason to leave again. Over a quiet dinner, Vanessa tried to bridge the gap. She talked about the baby, recounting doctor's visits and the days she'd felt the first flutters. He listened, or at least appeared to. But halfway through, he mentioned new developments in London, casually sliding in Lillian's name. "She's been invaluable," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Knows the London scene better than anyone else we've hired." Vanessa pressed her lips together. She recognized Lillian's name from brief references in company updates, but it was the first time Arthur spoke of her so freely and with admiration. A tinge of jealousy flickered in Vanessa's mind, but she brushed it away. Arthur's faithful devotion had always been a bedrock of their marriage. She had no reason to doubt him, or so she kept telling herself. Later that evening, as she lay in bed beside him, Vanessa suggested they plan a weekend away once the baby arrived, an idea that once would have thrilled him, but he merely responded with a non-committal nod. Rolling onto his side, he began checking emails on his phone instead. The heartbreak stung, but Vanessa resolved to stay patient. She reasoned that men under pressure sometimes pulled back emotionally, focusing intently on business. They had an empire to grow, after all, and Arthur was the man driving it forward. When Monday rolled around, Arthur returned to London. The next few weeks blurred into a pattern of late-night calls that ended before Vanessa could properly share her emotions, or in 2 short text messages that did little to assuage her rising anxiety. She sensed an invisible wall growing between them, carefully erected by secrets he wouldn't reveal. Vanessa confided her concerns in her father, Christopher Blackwood, during an unplanned visit to his Chelsea gallery. Christopher had always admired Arthur as a calm and reasonable son-in-law, but he, too, noticed changes. A father's intuition told him something was amiss. He encouraged Vanessa not to let suspicion fester without open conversation. "You two must talk," Christopher told her. "You can't protect your marriage if you're afraid to look behind the curtain." But every time Vanessa approached the topic, Arthur assured her everything was fine. More expansions, more negotiations, more traveling. Confused and feeling sidelined, she found herself forced into the role of an expectant mother, enduring pregnancy mostly alone. Even with the Harrington mansion hosting grand celebrations, the marital bond that once illuminated both their lives was quickly dimming. On a chilly December morning, Vanessa felt the first pang of real fear that if she didn't act fast, she might lose her husband to another life entirely. Early January brought fresh deals, and with them, another urgent business trip for Arthur. Vanessa decided that she couldn't remain in the dark any longer. She would surprise him in London. Determined to salvage their relationship and share in the excitement of the new venture, she booked a first-class flight on short notice. She took care to keep the trip secret, wanting to see Arthur in his unguarded state rather than have him prepare for her arrival. Upon landing at Heathrow, Vanessa felt a surge of anticipation. She stepped out into the chilly London air and took a cab straight to the Harrington Group's local headquarters in an upscale part of Mayfair. Heads turned as she strolled into the reception area, her pregnancy obvious beneath a stylish wool coat. She was surprised to see the staff murmuring excitedly, evidently. No one knew she was coming. Vanessa politely asked to see her husband, but his assistant apologized, saying he was out of the office. "He's at a meeting with Miss Moore," the assistant explained. Vanessa managed a small smile, but couldn't ignore the sudden knot in her stomach at the mention of Lillian's name. She glanced at the office door with Arthur's name on it, closed and dark. Resisting the swirl of unease, she collected Arthur's schedule from the assistant and decided to head to the property site where he and Lillian were rumored to be. The construction site was a short ride away on the edge of the Thames. Vanessa arrived just as a black luxury sedan pulled up. The passenger door opened, and out stepped Lillian Moore, elegant in a fitted trench coat. A moment later, Arthur emerged from the driver's side. They were laughing unusually close, it seemed. Vanessa froze. She caught a fleeting glimpse of Lillian's hand lingering on Arthur's arm, her gaze clinging to his in a way that went beyond professional camaraderie. The ease and familiarity of their body language told a sobering story. Vanessa's heart pounded. Her first instinct was to confront them then and there, but she felt a wave of vertigo. She leaned against a nearby pillar, chest heaving, tears threatening to spill. As the pair walked into a half-completed building, she managed to compose herself enough to follow at a distance. Inside, Arthur was explaining something to Lillian, pointing out structural elements. Lillian responded with an intensity that sparkled in her eyes, stepping closer than necessary. Unable to bear it any longer, Vanessa stepped forward. The surprise on Arthur's face was immediate and revealing. His expression flickered with shock, then something akin to guilt. Lillian quickly schooled her features, offering a polite greeting, as if she were oblivious to the tension. Vanessa could barely speak. Her question needed no words. She locked eyes with Arthur, silently asking for answers to the betrayal she already sensed. Arthur hurriedly ushered Lillian away, telling her to proceed with the meeting inside. With the mistress gone, Vanessa let her tears speak. She demanded an explanation. "Tell me I'm wrong," she whispered, voice trembling. "Tell me I'm seeing things." Arthur swallowed hard, unable to offer immediate reassurance. In that moment, Vanessa realized the cracks in their marriage had become a chasm, and no words could seal the damage that had already begun to spread. The confrontation that followed was as raw as it was inevitable. Arthur tried to downplay his closeness with Lillian, describing their late nights together as necessary for business dealings. But the guilt etched into his features betrayed him. For every dismissive explanation he gave, Vanessa countered with a detail she had observed: how Lillian's hand lingered on his shoulder, how he'd neglected to tell his wife she was even in the car with him that day, how his texts had grown cold and mechanical. Under the pressure of Vanessa's hurt and tears, Arthur finally admitted what she dreaded to hear. He and Lillian had crossed boundaries initially with an emotional bond that morphed into physical intimacy. Days of pent-up rage and heartbreak washed over Vanessa, leaving her breathless. She asked him how long it had been going on, her voice laced with betrayal. His stuttering answer of a few months told her that this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. The argument reverberated throughout the unfinished building. Hard-hatted workers passing by could sense that this confrontation was more than a routine couple's spat. Arthur tried to lead Vanessa to a private corner, away from curious gazes. Red-faced, her tears hot with anger, she refused his attempt at comfort. At one point, she clutched her belly protectively, as if shielding their unborn child from this harrowing moment. After a tense silence, Vanessa delivered an ultimatum. "If you want this marriage to survive, come home with me now. Cut ties with her. We'll fix this." For a fleeting second, Arthur looked as though he might surrender to reason, to loyalty. But then his gaze drifted to where Lillian stood in the distance, pretending to inspect blueprints but clearly watching them. Inexplicably, Arthur hesitated. That hesitation was like a dagger to Vanessa's chest. She realized he wasn't ready to let Lillian go, resolved not to dissolve into a puddle of shattered pride. Vanessa turned on her heels and walked away, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. She refused Arthur's attempts to follow her, and she told him not to contact her until he decided whose life he was truly committed to. Vanessa took a cab back to the Harrington Group's London office to retrieve her handbag and then headed straight to the airport. She spent the flight home in near silence, replaying the confrontation in her head 1,000 times. Shame battled with heartbreak, heartbreak mingled with boiling anger. She thought of her unborn child, an innocent soul caught in this emotional storm. When she landed in New York, she shut off her phone, ignoring the flood of voicemails and messages from Arthur, family members, and even her father. That night, she curled up in the bed she once shared with Arthur, hugging a pillow to her chest, feeling the stir of new life within her. She vowed that, no matter what, she would protect her child because the man who had promised to protect her might not be worthy of that vow anymore. While Vanessa agonized at home, Arthur stayed behind in London with Lillian. His actions ignited a firestorm of rumors among the upper echelons of the Harrington Group. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that the empire, once rock solid, was about to be tested like never before. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within days, word of Arthur's affair spread throughout the Harrington Group's corridors in New York, traveling with the speed of corporate gossip. Although employees tried to maintain decorum, hushed conversations turned every hallway into a rumor mill. Arthur's father, Reginald, was the first to summon him back to the States. Reginald had weathered many storms in his tenure, but none so personal, so fracturing to the family's public facade. Elizabeth Harrington, usually the calming force in the household, was furious. She felt protective of Vanessa and enraged that her son would risk not only his marriage, but also the family's legacy for a dalliance. Her anger was tempered by heartbreak. Knowing the harm Arthur's actions inflicted on the unborn grandchild, she and Reginald had awaited with so much joy. Meanwhile, Lillian Moore watched from her vantage point in London as the drama escalated. She was cunning enough to realize that with Vanessa's departure, she held a new sort of power. She inserted herself deeper into Arthur's professional decisions, feigning unwavering support while fueling his ambition. Whispers emerged that Lillian was more than just a mistress, that she eyed a potential role far grander than international liaison. With her intelligence and Arthur's trust, she could elbow her way into influencing the Empire's strategic direction. When Arthur finally flew back to New York for the Harrington board meeting, he found a line drawn in the sand. Reginald made his stance clear. If Arthur wished to remain the designated heir, he needed to straighten out this mess. In an emotional confrontation at the Harrington family mansion, Reginald and Elizabeth demanded that Arthur step back from Lillian and rebuild his marriage. They insisted that he focus on his pregnant wife, or they would consider appointing a different successor, possibly tapping a cousin or bringing in an external CEO. Arthur wasn't oblivious to the consequences. Part of him was riddled with guilt and recognized the gravity of what he had done to Vanessa. Yet, another part of him resisted the idea of having his personal life dictated by his family. Lillian had awakened desires in him, an independence from the obligations he had carried since childhood, a feeling of being alive that he couldn't rationalize away. In private phone calls, she reassured him that they could face the storm together, that no empire was worth sacrificing personal fulfillment. This tug of war gnawed at Arthur's conscience. He had pledged loyalty to both his wife and his unborn child, yet the pull of his mistress was potent. Friends like Richard Farnsworth, a longtime confidant and executive at Harrington Group, cautioned him he was heading for disaster. Even so, Arthur struggled to let go. He told his father he needed time to untangle the situation. Reginald's steely reply was straightforward. Time is a luxury you can't afford. Sort it out now or lose everything. But everything meant two drastically different things to Arthur: the family business he had trained his whole life to inherit, and the intoxicating, reckless spark of a new love he wasn't ready to give up. Despite repeated warnings from Reginald and Elizabeth, Arthur found himself back in Lillian's sphere of influence. He rationalized that her brilliance in European negotiations was indispensable for the company, especially with the London project nearing a critical phase. At night, they shared expensive dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants like 11 Madison Park, or flew to private celebrations hosted by potential investors. Each glass of champagne served only to deepen their bond. Yet Lillian wasn't content with remaining the other woman. She pressed Arthur about their future, asking if he truly saw her as a transitory affair, or if he would make space for her officially in his life. Occasionally, she'd hint that she didn't want to be hidden in the shadows of his public image. While Arthur still wore his wedding ring out of habit, or perhaps lingering loyalty, he began to appear in more and more photographs with Lillian at his side, fueling gossip columns. When Vanessa saw these images, Arthur's arm around Lillian at a London gallery opening, or the two of them stepping out of a private jet in Milan, she felt a wrenching mix of sorrow and fury. Her pregnancy advanced, and she relied on her father, Christopher Blackwood, and her mother-in-law, Elizabeth, for emotional support. She hadn't yet filed for divorce, clinging to the faint hope that Arthur might come to his senses. But each new headline chipped away at that hope, forging a sharper edge of resolve in her heart. In the midst of this fiasco, Lillian seized an opportunity to boost her standing within the Harrington Group. With Arthur's backing, she maneuvered to lead a crucial deal that would see the company expanding into the Middle Eastern market. This move required her to engage with wealthy investors in Dubai territory, once overseen exclusively by Reginald himself. Arthur used his executive influence to push the board to accept the proposal, praising Lillian's unrivaled expertise. Some board members, loyal to Reginald, balked at granting Lillian so much responsibility, but Arthur's persuasion carried enough weight to green-light the plan. Back in New York, as the shift in power dynamics became obvious, employees quietly started referring to Lillian as the future Miss Harrington. Rumors swirled that Arthur might force a public separation from Vanessa. The tension reached a boiling point when Elizabeth, deeply distressed, visited Vanessa in person. She apologized for her son's behavior, tears glistening in her eyes. She insisted that if Vanessa ever needed legal or financial support, Elizabeth would help without hesitation. It was a heartfelt gesture that highlighted the fracture at the core of the Harrington family. All the while, Lillian continued her ascent. She cultivated an image of a bold strategist, one who respected Reginald's legacy but promised to modernize the empire. Some executives admired her savvy, others viewed her as an opportunistic outsider. Whichever the perspective, no one could deny her growing influence on Arthur. Beyond the city lights and corporate boardrooms, however, karma was brewing like a storm cloud on the horizon, ready to unleash consequences far beyond petty gossip and fleeting romances. As winter gave way to spring, Vanessa's belly grew, and so did her determination. The heartbreak had morphed into a fierce protectiveness. She would do whatever it took to give her child stability. Arthur's actions left her no illusions. The marriage she had cherished was on life support. Whether it would die or somehow be reborn was now uncertain, but she refused to let her child suffer the fallout of Arthur's affair. Vanessa sought legal counsel through a friend of her father's, a discreet Manhattan attorney named Monica Chow. Over hushed conversations in a private office, Monica laid out Vanessa's options. She could file for divorce, push for a significant settlement, or fight for partial ownership in the Harrington Group if Arthur was indeed set to take over. Yet, Vanessa found herself torn. She remembered the love she and Arthur once shared, the philanthropic projects they launched together, the nights spent dreaming of a family legacy. And so she waited, hoping Arthur might choose to return before the final blow. In parallel, Vanessa began planning her own future. Inspired by her father's art dealings, she considered opening a boutique gallery in Soho, something that combined her passion for children's education with emerging artists who tackled social issues. She collaborated with philanthropic networks that once supported her and Arthur as a couple, this time forging her own path. Every day her baby moved, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She might be cast aside as a wife, but she would never be powerless as a mother. Her baby shower, organized by Elizabeth, was a somber affair. Held in the Harrington mansion, it was attended by close family friends, but Arthur was notably absent, stuck in London, or so the official excuse went. Standing beside Vanessa, as she opened gifts, Elizabeth quietly seethed. Each time she attempted to bring up Arthur's name, Vanessa simply offered a polite nod, refusing to let her heartbreak tarnish the celebration of new life. During this time, a surprising ally emerged. Richard Farnsworth, Arthur's trusted friend, and a key executive at the Harrington Group. Richard reached out to Vanessa, condemning Arthur's choices and vowing to support her in any way possible. He expressed concern not just for her well-being, but also for the stability of the company, fearing Lillian's growing influence would drive a wedge between Arthur and the long-time employees. He even hinted that Reginald was considering a backup plan, naming someone else as his successor if Arthur refused to cut ties with Lillian. Vanessa appreciated Richard's friendship, yet she avoided fueling more drama. She maintained her composure, focusing on the health of her baby and the new direction her life might take. However, she did confide in Richard a single truth: if Arthur doesn't come back on his own, no inheritance in the world can make me beg. With each passing day, the scales tip further. Would Arthur choose the woman he married, or the mistress who had bewitched him? Vanessa's resolve stiffened with every phone call left unanswered, and every tabloid photo capturing Arthur's escapades abroad. She might not have wanted a war, but she was ready for one if it was forced upon her. Arthur was drowning in a torrent of conflicting pressures. On one side, his parents threatened to revoke his inheritance if he didn't mend his marriage. On the other, Lillian kept him ensnared, insisting they could carve out a future together and do so more spectacularly than he ever had with Vanessa. He found himself leading double lives, the face of Harrington Group by day, the lover by night. The final straw arrived in the form of a corporate crisis. An investor from Dubai had second thoughts about the major deal Lillian was brokering, citing concerns about the Harrington Group's stability. Rumors of internal family conflict reached the investors' ears, and they worried this disarray could jeopardize their partnership. Arthur and Lillian flew to the Middle East to salvage the negotiation. Initially, it seemed the investor would retract entirely, but Lillian's unrelenting charm and Arthur's track record eventually calmed the waters. When the deal was secured, they celebrated in an extravagant suite at the Burj Al Arab in Dubai. Under the glow of the city's neon skyline, Lillian teased Arthur, suggesting they could run Harrington Group as king and queen if he would stop clinging to the vestiges of his old life. Fueled by adrenaline and champagne, Arthur momentarily believed that together they could defy the doubters and build an empire even more powerful than Reginald's. In that heady moment, he decided to take drastic action. He composed a terse email to Reginald and Elizabeth, stating that he would not bow to antiquated notions of family honor and that they should accept Lillian's presence if they wanted him in command. The email was the equivalent of a declaration of independence. He pressed send without fully grasping the ramifications. Back in New York, Reginald read the email with a furrowed brow, quietly conferring with Elizabeth. Anger and disappointment guided their next steps. Within 48 hours, Arthur's name was struck from several key decision-making committees at the Harrington Group. A hastily organized board meeting saw Reginald propose temporarily placing Farnsworth in charge of U.S. operations, a move widely interpreted as a demotion for Arthur. Arthur discovered the news when he returned to New York. Outraged and blindsided, he stormed into his father's office, demanding an explanation. The confrontation was brutal. Reginald reminded Arthur that he still owned the majority of the company's shares and would do whatever was necessary to protect the business from Arthur's personal dramas. That includes removing you from the line of succession if you don't come to your senses, Reginald warned. Arthur retorted that he'd take them all to court if they tried. In the midst of this corporate chaos, Vanessa's due date approached. Arthur hadn't called her in weeks, too mired in the fight for control to realize how close he was to losing something far more precious than a corporate title. He was caught in a battle that threatened to consume him, too deafened by pride to hear the ticking clock that would soon deliver fate's final judgment on his reckless choices. While Arthur and Reginald clashed in the boardroom, Vanessa's labor pains began early one April morning. She was alone in the apartment she once shared with Arthur, wincing through contractions that arrived with punishing frequency. Hastily, she called her father, Christopher Blackwood, who rushed her to Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Elizabeth Harrington, upon hearing the news, dropped everything and rushed to Vanessa's side. The tension between the families took a back seat to the imminent arrival of a new Harrington heir. As the hours stretched, Vanessa fought through each wave of pain, her heart heavy with the absence of Arthur. Elizabeth held her hand and dabbed sweat from her forehead, whispering reassurances that the Harrington family would stand by her and the baby no matter what. Tears dampened Vanessa's cheeks, a maelstrom of emotions, anguish over Arthur's betrayal, fear for the future, and a flicker of hope that the birth of this child might awaken some dormant sense of responsibility in Arthur. Back at the Harrington Group's headquarters, Richard Farnsworth learned of Vanessa's labor and immediately informed Arthur. At first, Arthur hesitated, torn by anger at his parents and the complicated feelings he harbored for Vanessa. But something primal stirred within him, an undeniable urge to be present for the birth of his child. He abruptly cancelled a meeting with Lillian and sprinted to the hospital. When Arthur arrived, the atmosphere in the delivery room was tense. Vanessa was in the final stages of labor, sweat-soaked, her face contorted with pain. She caught sight of Arthur standing tentatively by the door. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then another contraction hit, and she doubled over, crying out. Elizabeth glared at Arthur, as if to say, "This is what you've left her to go through alone." Yet she stepped aside so Arthur could approach. He gently took Vanessa's hand, tears wetting his own eyes. Whispering apologies, he assured her he was here, that he wouldn't leave. Despite her anger and heartbreak, Vanessa clung to him in that moment. The next hour was a blur of medical instructions, urgent voices, and culminating screams. Finally, the child, an 8-pound baby boy, entered the world. In the hush that followed, the baby's cries filled the room, a clarion call announcing a new chapter. The nurses placed him in Vanessa's arms. She cradled her son, a mixture of joy and grief washing over her. Arthur stared, awestruck, reaching out to lightly touch the baby's tiny hand. Vanessa didn't speak to Arthur for a long time after the delivery. When she finally did, her words were soft and laced with sorrow. "We're naming him Michael Alexander Harrington. Because no matter what happens with us, this child is still a Harrington." And that was the moment Arthur felt the weight of what he stood to lose: his child's innocence, his family's legacy, his own sense of identity dangling precariously by the thread of his own reckless choices. The days after Michael's birth unfolded in a strange, bittersweet haze. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Vanessa recovered in a private suite surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the muffled cries of newborns down the hall. Baby Michael, tiny, pink, and impossibly perfect, slept in the bassinet beside her bed, a living testament to both love and betrayal. Arthur visited daily. He came bearing flowers, gifts, and apologies he barely knew how to express. He watched Vanessa with hollow eyes as she tended to Michael with a gentleness he had long admired. She permitted him to hold the baby, feed him bottles, even rock him to sleep, but between them stood an invisible wall, thickened by heartbreak and mistrust. Vanessa's smiles were polite, her words careful. She would not allow anger to consume these early days of her son's life. But every time she met Arthur's gaze, she was reminded of the choices that had brought them here, the loneliness of her pregnancy, the nights crying alone, the sight of Arthur and Lillian laughing under the London sky. Meanwhile, the world outside the hospital room spun into chaos. News of internal conflict at the Harrington Group had leaked to the business press. Cracks in the dynasty? Blared one headline, speculating on power struggles within the family empire. Gossip columnists picked up the scent of scandal, weaving tantalizing tales about Arthur's affair with a mysterious British advisor. Investors grew nervous, stock prices dipped. In corporate boardrooms, whispers of a leadership change grew louder. Reginald Harrington, long a master of crisis management, moved quickly. Within days, he formally stripped Arthur of his interim executive powers, appointing Richard Farnsworth as acting CEO. Arthur was relegated to an advisory role with no decision-making authority. The move was unprecedented and sent shockwaves through Harrington Group. Shareholders applauded the decisive action. Long-time employees mourned the downfall of the once promising heir. Arthur reeled from the blow. He lashed out at his father in heated emails and late-night voicemails. He demanded meetings. He tried to plead, to reason, even to threaten. But Reginald remained unmoved. His response was chillingly professional. "You are entitled to nothing, Arthur. You must earn it back, if you can." If the corporate downfall wasn't enough, another storm was brewing, one Arthur never saw coming. Anonymous leaks to London newspapers revealed that Lillian Moore had falsified parts of her resume. Credentials from prestigious institutions were proven to be exaggerated or, worse, entirely fabricated. Journalists unearthed former colleagues who hinted at other deceptions, misrepresented deals, stretched truths, whispered scandals from her past roles. The news broke like a dam bursting. Lillian's name was splashed across business and tabloid papers alike. Social climber unmasked. Lillian Moore's web of lies screamed one headline. Editorials painted her as a cunning manipulator who had used Arthur's influence to ascend the corporate ladder, endangering an entire legacy for personal gain. Inside the Harrington Group, board members demanded immediate action. Lillian's presence had become an unmanageable liability. Shareholders threatened lawsuits if swift measures weren't taken. Arthur was forced to confront Lillian in a tense, private meeting at her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. She greeted him coolly, dressed in silk pajamas, sipping wine as if the world outside hadn't caught fire. When Arthur asked her directly about the allegations, she laughed a brittle, empty sound. "They're scared of me," she said, voice dripping with disdain. "Reginald orchestrated this, don't you see? They can't handle a woman rising too fast in their old boys' club." Arthur wanted desperately to believe her, wanted to believe that his downfall wasn't tied to her lies. But the evidence was overwhelming. The inconsistencies, the missing credentials, the angry calls from investors. "You lied to me," Arthur said quietly. "No more than you lied to yourself." Lillian shot back, her eyes flashing. "You wanted a fantasy. I gave it to you." It was a brutal truth, and it shattered whatever illusions Arthur had left. The Harrington board forced Lillian's resignation by the end of the week. She walked away from the company under a cloud of scandal, her career in tatters. Arthur did not accompany her. In fact, he didn't see her again after that meeting. She disappeared from New York's glittering social circles almost overnight, leaving behind only the wreckage of ambition and betrayal. For Arthur, the reality of his actions hit harder than any tabloid headline. He had sacrificed his marriage, his family's trust, and his professional future for a woman who had built her persona on deception. Worse yet, he had nearly forfeited the right to be present for the birth of his own son. Late one evening, unable to sleep, Arthur drove aimlessly through Manhattan, finally parking outside the hospital where Vanessa and Michael still rested. He sat in his car, staring at the glowing windows, feeling the enormity of his mistakes settle on his shoulders like a crushing weight. Inside the hospital, Vanessa sang softly to Michael, rocking him gently in the twilight hours. Her heart still ached, but it also brimmed with resolve. She had already begun taking steps to secure her and her son's future. Working closely with her attorney, Monica Chow, Vanessa demanded that Reginald formalize legal protections, ensuring Michael's rightful inheritance within the Harrington dynasty, regardless of Arthur's standing. To Reginald's credit, he agreed immediately. In a rare show of tenderness, Reginald visited Vanessa privately at the hospital. He held his newborn grandson carefully, marveling at his tiny fingers and soft downy hair. "You are family," Reginald said simply. "Always." Vanessa wept, then tears of exhaustion, relief, and bittersweet gratitude. She might have lost the dream of a perfect marriage, but she had gained something even stronger, a commitment to her son's future and a fierce clarity about her own worth. As for Arthur, he stood at a crossroads. He could continue spiraling, consumed by regret and resentment, or he could begin the long, difficult road back toward redemption, a road that would demand humility, patience, and the willingness to rebuild trust from the ashes. For the first time in months, Arthur realized that no one, not Reginald, not Elizabeth, not Vanessa, could save him. He had to save himself. Karma had arrived, swift and brutal, and now it was up to Arthur to decide whether he would be defined by his downfall or by the way he chose to rise again. Not long after Lillian's scandal broke, Arthur sought to rectify the damage within the Harrington Group. He met with Reginald and Elizabeth in a private conference room at the company's towering midtown skyscraper. He admitted his errors, including the arrogance of believing he could juggle a family empire and a reckless affair without consequences. For the first time in months, he spoke earnestly, acknowledging that he had been blinded by ambition and a misguided search for independence. Reginald, arms crossed, listened intently. After a long pause, he told Arthur, "Son, the company can recover. We've faced crises before, and we'll face them again, but you need to decide who you are. Are you willing to fight, to be worthy of this name, or is it best you step aside?" Though the words stung, Arthur realized this was a kind of mercy. Reginald was extending him a lifeline, but only if he confronted his failings head-on. Meanwhile, Vanessa had returned home from the hospital, baby Michael nestled in a newly furnished nursery. She leaned heavily on Christopher and Elizabeth for support. Late at night, she would rock Michael to sleep, singing lullabies while tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. Despite the heartbreak, her maternal instincts were fierce. She vowed that no matter what Arthur did, their son would never feel unloved or unwanted. When Arthur finally gathered the courage to appear at Vanessa's door, he arrived with trembling hands. Inside, the apartment was filled with the gentle hush that only a newborn can bring. Vanessa let him in, neither welcoming him with open arms nor turning him away. She led him to the nursery, where Michael dozed in a pale blue crib. Arthur stood there, overwhelmed by the fragility and innocence of this tiny life. In hushed tones, he asked for forgiveness. He spoke of trying to find his way back to being the man she once loved, the father Michael deserved. Vanessa listened, her eyes locked on the child. After a lengthy silence, she turned to Arthur. "Forgiveness is earned, Arthur, not demanded. I'll never deny you the right to be his father, but I won't let you hurt us again." Her words were resolute, a boundary that signaled a possible path forward, but only if Arthur truly repented. The next few months were a grueling process of penance and rebuilding. Arthur severed all personal contact with Lillian, who left New York to escape the storm of bad press. He accepted the board's decision to keep Farnsworth as interim CEO, devoting himself to smaller-scale projects that helped stabilize the company's public image. He even resumed philanthropic work, supporting causes Vanessa cared about, visiting schools in underprivileged neighborhoods and quietly funding art programs. Vanessa remained cautious, watching from a distance, focusing on Michael and on launching her new Soho gallery. She refused to let the Harrington name define her future, determined to make a name for herself. Still, there were glimpses of the old warmth between her and Arthur whenever he visited the apartment, carrying groceries or offering to babysit. They started attending joint therapy sessions, initially for co-parenting, but gradually to see if there was a chance of salvaging their marriage. In time, the Harrington Group regained its footing. Farnsworth proved to be a capable interim CEO, but the board, recognizing the importance of continuity, allowed Arthur to rejoin the leadership ranks once he demonstrated genuine commitment and stability. Reginald remained partially retired, stepping in for guidance when needed, while Elizabeth helped Vanessa care for Michael. Their grandchild became a living reminder of what truly mattered beyond profit margins and corporate titles. As for karma, it had exacted its due share. Arthur felt the weight of nearly losing everything: his family, his name, his future. He still carried the scars, literal and metaphorical, from the battles fought both at home and in the boardroom. But it was those very scars that spurred him to be a better father, a more compassionate leader, and perhaps, if fate allowed again, a devoted husband. In the end, the baby indeed took his name and his rightful place in the Harrington legacy. And for Arthur, the road to redemption became a lifelong journey of proving himself worthy of both. Thank you for accompanying us on this emotional roller coaster of power, betrayal, and redemption. The story of Arthur, Vanessa, Lillian, and baby Michael reveals how a single moment of weakness can unravel the strongest bonds and how karma never fails to collect its dues. If you found yourself absorbed in the twists and turns of this real-life-style drama, don't forget to give this video a like. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Would you forgive Arthur if you were in Vanessa's shoes? Share your perspective on betrayal, family legacies, and second chances. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories of love, ambition, and the high stakes that come with the choices we make. Until next time, remember, every choice we make leaves a ripple, and sometimes it becomes a storm.